What's up, biology students? Mr. Holloway here. Today, we're going to learn about the structure and function of proteins, some of my personal favorite organic macromolecules. Proteins, like all organic molecules, are made largely of carbon atoms, and it is important for us to remember that carbon has some special properties that make it so useful in the building of these large, complex molecules. Specifically, it is carbon's ability to form up to 4 covalent bonds with up to 4 other atoms simultaneously, including other carbon atoms, that allows carbon-based molecules to grow so large and to perform so many important biological functions. Protein molecules are the workforce of the cell. They are the molecules that do most of the important jobs that need to be done. The job that a particular protein molecule does is determined by the shape it takes when it is constructed by the cell. Here we see a few three-dimensional representations of some of the many protein molecules known to exist. Our cells make literally thousands of different protein molecules, around 100,000 actually, and each one is structured to do a specific job inside our cells. The function of a cell is defined by the protein molecules that it makes, and the jobs that protein molecules do inside our cells are very, very important. Among the many important functions performed by proteins are regulating chemical reactions, fighting disease, transporting substances into and out of the cell, providing support and structure, and carrying oxygen through our blood. This last one is performed by a protein called hemoglobin. When we inhale, oxygen diffuses from our lungs into our bloodstream where it binds with the protein molecule hemoglobin. This way, the oxygen can be transported throughout our bodies in our bloodstream and can be dropped off at cells that require this oxygen along the way. This is just one of many examples of the important jobs done by protein molecules. Just like carbohydrates and nucleic acids, proteins are made of numerous small but similar building blocks. The monomers of a protein are called amino acids, and there are over 20 different kinds of amino acids. All amino acids are identical except for this part, the so-called R group or side group highlighted in this figure. This R group determines what kind of amino acid we are dealing with, and interactions between different side groups determines the overall shape of a protein molecule. As you can see, these different amino acids have different properties depending on the side group it contains. Some are positively charged, others are negatively charged. Some are polar and some are nonpolar. As you might imagine, a positively charged amino acid might be attracted to a negatively charged amino acid, and two positively charged amino acids might repel each other. It is these kind of interactions that cause a protein molecule to get folded and bent into its final shape. Our bodies can build most of these amino acids, but 9 of these amino acids must be consumed in our diet because our bodies are not able to make them. These are called essential amino acids because they are an essential part of our diet. Without them, our bodies would not be able to build certain really important protein molecules. Most meat products contain all 9 of these essential amino acids, but you can also get all of them by eating a combination of beans and corn. Wherever you get them, it is very important to make sure that you get all of them. Amino acid monomers join together in long chains like beads on a string. In this figure, each colorful bead represents a single amino acid. If we zoom in on a few of these, as we have here, we can see that R group or side group that determines which specific amino acid we have. This long chain is a polymer that we call a polypeptide. A chain of amino acids is called a polypeptide because amino acids bond to other amino acids with something called a peptide bond. And the prefix poly means many or multiple. At this point, our polypeptide is pretty unstructured, just a loose chain of amino acids. There are a few unstructured polypeptides that may play important biological functions. But for most polypeptides, it's what happens next that turns these molecules into something useful. Proteins have up to 4 levels of structure, and the specific order of the amino acids in a polypeptide chain is only the first level of structure. Next, that polypeptide chain gets coiled and folded as a result of interactions between the different amino acids, some of which may be attracted to each other, while others are repelled, for example. After that, this coiled and folded polypeptide is foiled again, and that's the third level of structure. Often, this highly structured polypeptide sticks together with a few more highly structured polypeptides, and the conglomerate of multiple structured polypeptides is the thing that we call a protein molecule. Each individual polypeptide makes up a subunit of this larger protein. Depending on the order of the amino acids involved, this bending, folding, coiling, and combining can play out in many, many different ways. And this is why proteins can take on so many different shapes. Remember, it is this shape that determines what job a protein will do inside of our cells. This diagram depicts the lipid bilayer that makes up our cell membranes. You might recall that these big green molecules embedded in the membrane are proteins. Proteins embedded in the cell membrane like this are often involved in the transport of molecules into and out of the cell, thereby regulating and controlling what substances are allowed in and what substances are not. This can happen in a few different ways. This first image shows what's called a protein channel, which is simply open or which can open when the right hormone comes along. These channels allow molecules of the right shape and size to pass freely back and forth. The shape of the protein determines what kind of molecules can move back and forth through the channel. This second image shows a protein pump, which is pretty much exactly what it sounds like. This pump requires energy in order to forcefully move a particular kind of molecule from one side of the membrane to the other. Once again, the shape of the protein determines what kind of molecules will be pumped from one side of this membrane to the other side. Other proteins found in the cell membrane are called receptors, and these proteins receive chemical messages, something like a hormone, sent by other cells in the body, and by receiving this message, the protein is able to transmit that message into the cell in order to make the cell perform some specific function. Other proteins, called antibodies, help our body to identify and fight invading pathogens or disease-causing agents like bacteria or viruses. Just as is the case for our cells, these pathogens have proteins and carbohydrates of their own embedded on their surfaces. These molecules are called antigens. Antibody proteins are used by our immune system to identify invading pathogens, and when they come into contact with an antigen of just the right shape, they stick to it and initiate an immune response that will hopefully destroy the invader. Basically, an antibody is like a flag that tells the immune system, "Hey, this thing shouldn't be here, come destroy it." Cells in our immune system, called B cells, are responsible for making antibodies. Different B cells make different antibodies, each with a different shape, to help us identify a wide variety of invading pathogens. When one of these antibodies comes into contact with a compatible antigen, the B cell that holds it is selected and begins to make copies of itself. These copies, called memory B cells, because they remember the pathogen that triggered their formation, start producing huge numbers of antibodies, which prime the immune system so that it is ready to defeat the same pathogen if it encounters it again. Vaccines take advantage of this natural immune response by introducing a harmless fragment of a pathogen that the immune system can recognize. The immune system responds to this harmless fragment by producing the antibodies necessary to defeat the harmful version of that pathogen should it ever invade the body. In this way, vaccines prevent disease by priming our immune systems to destroy harmful pathogens before they become a problem. But sometimes, our antibodies also can work against us. For example, when a person requires an organ transplant or a blood transfusion, there is always a chance that the body will reject this transplant or transfusion because antibodies recognize the transplant as foreign and flag it to be attacked by the immune system, just as they would with a bacteria or virus. You are likely aware of the association between protein and muscle tissue, but you might not know much about what that association means. It is not uncommon to hear people talk about muscles being made of protein, or to talk about how consuming protein is necessary for building muscle. but that only vaguely gets at why protein is important for our muscles. Rather than talking about muscles being made of protein, it would be far more accurate to say that muscle cells use many specialized protein molecules in order to perform their function. Muscles are made of muscle tissue, which is made of specialized muscle cells. These cells use protein filaments called actin and myosin to contract in order to generate movement. The way it works is that ATP binds to one of these filaments, causing this little foot-shaped structure to basically kick into this other filament, pushing it in this direction. This causes the whole muscle cell to get shorter, and when a whole bunch of muscle cells are all getting shorter together, this causes the muscle itself to contract. Those muscle contractions are responsible for making our hearts beat, our stomachs churn, and our skeletons move. Many proteins also function as enzymes. Enzymes help our bodies to regulate the thousands of chemical reactions that occur inside our bodies every day. Enzymes help us to regulate these reactions by acting as catalysts. And a catalyst is any substance that helps lower the amount of energy required to start a chemical reaction. Therefore, catalysts make it easier for a reaction to get started and help these reactions to happen faster as a result. Like all proteins, the shape of an enzyme determines its function. In this case, the shape of an enzyme determines what kind of reaction this enzyme can catalyze. And each chemical reaction that occurs in our body has a specific enzyme that regulates that reaction. Enzymes work by providing a location for chemical reactions to take place, and this location is called the active site. The molecules that fit into this active site are called substrates. Enzymes and their substrates fit together very precisely, just like a lock and key. And just like a key won't open a lock if it's got the wrong shape, an enzyme cannot catalyze a reaction if it has the wrong shape either. Put that lock into that key, or rather, that substrate into the active site of an enzyme, and the combination is called an enzyme-substrate complex. By binding together like this, the enzyme is able to control the chemical reaction that takes place, helping it to get started by reducing the amount of energy required for this reaction to happen. In the case of this figure, the enzyme sucrase has an active site with a shape that matches the shape of a sucrose molecule. Sucrose, which is the substrate involved in this particular reaction, is a polysaccharide, a sugar made of one glucose monomer bonded to one fructose monomer. And the enzyme sucrase helps our bodies to take this polysaccharide apart into its individual monomers. We can see how this process works if we follow the arrows in this figure. First, sucrose binds to the active site of the enzyme, forming an enzyme-substrate complex. A chemical reaction occurs, and sucrose is converted into the final products of this reaction, glucose and fructose. The products break loose and the enzyme is ready to be used again. The function of a cell is determined largely by the protein molecules manufactured by that cell, and protein molecules do most of the actual work inside of any given cell in our body. They defend us against disease and help transport nutrients into our cells. They also help us to remove waste from our cells and to regulate the chemical reactions that occur inside of them. They also provide important structures, especially in our muscle tissue. All proteins are made of amino acids, and because proteins are so important to our lives, it is equally important to make sure to eat a diet which will provide us with all of the essential amino acids we need to build the many different kinds of proteins upon which our lives depend. And as you can tell by this image, the structure of some proteins is as beautiful as it is complex. And with that, I will bring our video to a close. Thanks for watching, everyone.